Optimist.
Oh, you're perfect. You're great. Hello, everyone. I am joined here today with the one and only Myesha Reynolds of Equity Lens Consultants. Uh, Hello, Myesha. Thank you so much for joining us today. I briefly want to introduce Myesha. She's a wonderful, wonderful soul. I think if anyone's coming into this from watching uh, or knowing me from my "This is why I can't stand the word equity" video, I think this one's going to be very interesting, so you might want to stay tuned. So, Myesha Reynolds is an equity coach and the founder of Equity Lens Consultants. Her mission is to simplify equity by delivering services and creating content that teaches people how to decipher equitable practices from inequitable ones. So, for anyone who has seen that can't stand the word equity, there's a lot of equity happening, but I promise it's going to be eye opening. Hang in with me. What sets her work apart is her balanced perspective, which allows Myesha to approach matters of equity in an authentic, personalized way. Myesha stands by the belief that in order to be equitable, we must be willing to do what is right and fair for all people at all times and in all circumstances. And you can visit her website at equitylensconsultants.com, and I've put the link in the bio as well. Myesha, welcome. So the way I stumbled into Myesha's equity workshop was totally by accident. And I think that because of my apprehension of the word equity, I kind of was like, oh, there's an equity workshop happening. And I was going to a Bible study. And it was sort of like this, like, surprise, like it's an equity workshop. Da, 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 da. Um, Myesha, I had this like notion that equity really just means put other people down so that you can be elevated up. And I'm sure you've seen the image of the three boys standing trying to watch a baseball game over a fence. And you have someone who's tall who doesn't need that big of a box. Other people, the other two are shorter and they need these multiple boxes. You've seen that, right? I'm sure
Oh
you've seen
yeah.
that.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So, what is it about that picture? What are your opinions of that picture? Because I have my opinions. I'll share it after I get your thoughts on that
Yeah.
equity photo.
Yeah. Hey Kimmy, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be with you, and for everybody watching, thank you for joining. I I was a teacher, so I worked in education for about 20 years, and I remember when we first really started talking about equity, maybe I don't know 7, 8 years ago. That was one of the pictures that they always use in every professional development to say equity is giving everybody what they need. And so as an educator and I'm in these professional development workshops, I'm like, oh, okay, that's what equity is. And so I just started letting people spoon feed me what they felt that equity, equity is. And I just was like, okay, I guess this is how what equity means and how you operate equitably by just giving people what they need. Never really kind of unpacking that and asking like, well, why this image or why where did you get this from and who is the voice behind these messages. I just was unfortunately kind of taking what was given to me. But then I began to do my own research and gather my own understanding, and I was like, oh wait, equity is just the quality of being fair, which is how I want
Right.
to always live my life when I am interacting with people, whether it's at the grocery store or school or at my church or, at the gas station pumping gas, like wherever I am, it's right to treat people fairly. And that's what I thought equity was. And so I think I've been a little dumbfounded with how we've kind of taken one word and decided to give it a life of its own that doesn't really paint a fair picture of what equity really is.
And briefly, kind of reversing, you mentioned that you are a teacher
Mhm.
and you talked about professional development, which I want to ask about in a second.
Mhm.
But what got you into teaching? What was your passion behind that? And do you still have that passion for education?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So when I was younger, I actually didn't know I wanted to be a teacher. And I was like, I think I want to be a nurse. And so I spent a year in high school every Saturday morning going to the ER and volunteering. And I was like, well, I love nursing, but it wasn't just for me. So then I thought, well, maybe I'll work in business. And I did some work at a bank for my senior year of high school. And I was like, no, this is not it. And then I subbed. No, I'm sorry. I'm tutored at an elementary school in their after school program. And I loved it. I just fell in love with teaching kids. I love seeing people come alive when they learn something new. I really have a heart for children, but I also have a heart for teaching people.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be just children because I've taught from, 4-year-old kindergarten, but all the way up to college level. So I just love learning and love helping other people to learn. And so that's how I got into teaching. And yeah, spend so much time. And I feel like my equity work that I do now is just a continuation of a passion that I have, and that is for educating people. But I also feel
Mhm.
as though I have a duty and that is to educate people properly in a very
Mhm.
balanced way to help give people a very balanced perspective on things.
Yeah. And I notice you're mentioning like balanced and
Mhm,
correct way. You're mentioning the right way to present equity.
mhm.
What is the right way to present equity before I ask you about professional development?
Yeah, you know what always comes to my mind, and this is something that whether people consider themselves religious or not, people will, I believe, agree that we should treat others the way we want people to treat us, right? And so when I think of the heart of the message of equity, I think about it being that, like, if we all did unto others what we want them to do to us, then we would all be operating and living fairly, treating one another fairly, and that is the message of equity. And so I think what's happened is we have decided through many of the voices out there who are the louder voices behind these conversations about race, diversity, equity, inclusion, equality. Those loud voices get to seemingly control the narrative that is just projected, especially in the United States of America.
Yeah.
and
What? Yes, continue. Sorry.
and so I just feel as though we need to, which my shirt says, a narrative shifter. We need to shift
Nice.
this narrative back about equity and say, no, 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 no. It does not mean lifting other people up to pull some people down. There is enough space and enough room in every area of life where we all can have a place, a seat at the table, or a place in that industry, or what have you. And we don't have to say, well, some people have had these advantages for so long. Now let's pull them down and let's help other people rise up. We as a people, we should be united on the fact that we are all human beings. And because we are human beings, we all have giftings and talents and abilities and um, many other things that we can give to contribute to make the shared world that we live in a better place. And so to do that, we can work together to accomplish mighty, mighty things. And instead, this message of equity has been so divisive in
Mhm.
our nation in particular, where people just are constantly pointing fingers at who is in the wrong, who's gotten a handout, who should have this opportunity, who shouldn't have this opportunity. And I just think to myself, we've got it all wrong. We've got it all wrong. We can unite and say,
Mm.
hey, let's work together. I always say, if I was if there was a fire in my home and a firefighter came and he was not a person of color, I'm not going to be like, oh, don't help me. Wait, send me, somebody else who maybe is looking out for my good, looking out for me, or who looks like me or whatever. I'm like, you are a fellow human being who's trying to save my life. Thank you. I appreciate that. You know what I mean? And so I think
Mhm.
we've just lost so much of the humanness when we are kind of going about with this shifted narrative about
Yeah. So why don't we just refer to that as equality? Cuz I grew up with the word equality all the time.
equity.
And I thought it was a pretty adequate word to describe that fair and equal treatment.
Yeah.
And then personally for me, it was kind of coming out of college plus the sort of transition into 2020 that equity just boomed. Why don't we just have like why doesn't this discussion operate on the basis of equality? What's the difference between equality and equity?
Yeah, for me, I like to think of when I think of equality, I think, wow, go back to that root word equal, thinking of we're all created equally. We should have equal opportunity. I think which, I totally am all for that. I think when I look at equity, though, I say, well, equity seems to be the feet or the heartbeat to that. Then, so because we were all
Mhm.
created equally, we all should have equal rights. We all have equal rights, like under the law. We should, and so because of those things, the fact that we were all created equally, we should all be treated fairly. And I think that's
Okay.
where I say, okay, this is the legwork, the action behind equality, because
Right.
we were all created equally all of our lives, but there have been things in this country that have happened that have been
Mhm.
unfair and not right towards certain groups of people, whether it was for race or gender or socioeconomic status or education or lack of, all of those factors have caused people to be treated unfairly, even though we
Yeah.
were all created equal. So I think it's just, to me, I just look at it as like, what are the actions then that
Yeah.
prove that we're both created equally? Then what do we do? What
Mhm.
does that look like? And that's where I feel like the equity part comes in, and the work that I do, because when I meet with, whether it's schools and I'm doing presentations, or businesses or nonprofits or churches, I'm thinking about the person. So I present scenarios or actions or procedures, policies, things that we can look at to say, oh, okay, is this fair? Is this right? And if not,
Yeah.
what can we do to fix it?
Excellent. Thank you for that breakdown. That
Mhm.
was very clear and yeah, I always appreciate the illustration of like the legs of equality is equity. I think
Mhm.
that's very clear and very brilliant. I also want to ask you about professional development. For
Mhm.
those who are not familiar with education, but who have noticed diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of creep into K to 12 education, could you break down for us regular folks what professional development is and what role it plays in education?
Yeah, so teachers are constantly receiving trainings, workshops, known as professional development, usually a few times a month. The topics can vary, but with the climate of our country over the last few years, a lot of that goes back to equity. Even if it's like you're looking at literacy, and how to, create better readers and writers, there's always that placement
Right.
on. So I think in many ways it's great, because I used to be an equity coach for a school district, and I would walk through schools with the principal, and we would stay in for a few minutes, and I kind of make some notes of things that were not equitable, were not fair, and
Mhm.
I had a criteria for that. I thought, we
Right.
are here as educators wanting all students to succeed. So are we doing our part to make sure that happens? And so I would step back and say, now these are some things that I noticed that wouldn't kind of fall under the line, would not be considered equitable, but this is how we can change it. So I love to point out like what we could maybe shift and how we can do that. So to give the solution to that is very practical, and something
Mhm.
not just for one student, but for all students. When I went to school to be a teacher, I never in my mind thought like I'm going to teach one type of child. I was like, I love children. I love people,
Right.
and I want to teach all children, and I need to do what it takes to make sure that they learn and that they learn at high levels. And so when I would do these walkthroughs, I would go back and then lead professional development based on like how we can improve the practices in classrooms so that we could be providing that quality education. And oftentimes I notice factors like the mindset of different teachers towards some children. They might think, oh, these kids don't really they don't do their homework. They don't care about education. Oh, the parents don't care because they're not coming to conferences or sending notes back. And I'll say, hey, wait a minute. Like, we have no idea the family situation. And let's not jump to those assumptions, because what I saw was that those assumptions then affected the way in which a teacher interacted with a student. And so I
Mm.
believe even on like relational equity, like we don't have favorites in as a teacher. Like you have the
Yeah.
student, you're there for all of them. And so you have to sometimes have your, do a little deprogramming of your mind or mindset shifting so that you can really do what's best for those students because they're your
Mhm.
students and not because you kind of click or jive well with those kids, or you think certain things about their family, like, oh, they care about learning and education, so I really need to teach them at high levels. But the other ones, oh, well, they're not here. And there are people who still do that today. And that's very
Yeah.
unfortunate. So I know I kind of went on this
Yeah.
there, but when it comes to professional development, it's happening all the time. I think what's is alarming to me is that oftentimes people are brought in to do trainings, and I've seen it with my own eyes, where it is
Right.
very much of pointing fingers, or it's giving teachers, trying to give them tools or ideas or strategies that really haven't proven to work, or been
Mm.
proven to work, or that are for certain types of children. If you don't believe me, I was working with a person who was giving a training, and I said, the person said to me, "What do you think about all of these, or these two new strategies that we're going to try out?" And I said, "Oh, you know what? I think these are actually really great, and I feel as though all students could really benefit from implementing these two strategies." And the person got really upset with me and said, "You need to watch what you say when you say all children. I'm talking about Black children." And I said, "I'm sorry.
Mm.
If I think a strategy is going to work for students, like, you're to me, I'm like, you're kind are you saying that Black children have to be taught this strategy because they're not as capable? Are you saying that an Asian child, I can't teach them this strategy because it's low
Mm.
level and they're higher thinking? Are you saying that a white student might not need this, even though they may come from a background that this strategy can help?" I was trying to figure out and help this
Like, right.
gentleman say, like, no, 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 no. This is why, we can't see things this and this way, because we have to think, will this work for any student, or some students? Who can it work for? That's who will teach this new learning strategy to, not box it in
Mhm.
based on color, because I'm like, what does that say too?
Yeah. Are people do you think people are getting they're conflating equity with skin color as if to say um oh, let's be equitable, aka black people are powerless
Mhm.
automatically. Therefore, just it's just a one size fits all approach. We if we're creating equitable programs, that just means we're lifting up black people, but we're
Mhm.
not realizing that we're assuming, like you said, we're throwing that assumption that
Yeah.
every black child is automatically incapable.
Right.
And do you think this is kind of bringing, ironically, bringing inequity through the mainstream definition of equity?
Absolutely. And it's so unfortunate, because oftentimes when I do workshops around equity, I kind of have to start there. I'm like, well, the elephant in the room when you're talking about equity always, seems to go back to race. And I think that the media has played a huge part in that, and constantly playing the blame card, or telling, there are people who are not people of color who will tell people of color how they've been wronged or how they're oppressed and all of those things. And so for me, I'm just like, no, it's not actually about race. There
Right.
have been, and I don't ever want to say this to say, like, oh, I'm not aware of the history of racism in this country. Absolutely I am. What I am saying is that we need to move forward. We have made huge gains in this country, and I feel like in so many ways we've gone backwards because of the constant push to make us think about race as the
Yeah.
first thing. Like, you don't like somebody, you and someone don't get along, it's because your race. You didn't
Yeah.
get a job, it's because of your race. You didn't, get proper treatment at a hospital, it's because of your race. Sometimes that is the case. It's just
Yeah.
not all the time. And I think that
Exactly.
we are doing a injustice to this generation right now of children who then are going to look at everything through the lens of racism. Like, I didn't even think
Right.
about my friends and their race. I went to a very diverse schools from, kindergarten all the way up. And friends would come over all the time from all different backgrounds. Like, I obviously knew, if they were white or Hispanic or whatever, but that didn't matter to me. Nobody had to teach me, or I didn't feel like I had to teach them or have somebody else teach them how to be an anti-racist, because I didn't think that they were ever racist or treated me differently because of my skin color. And I feel like we're
Right.
really doing an injustice to our this upcoming generation, who these I see so many young people who are very free thinking and really are looking for some answers, and they want to stand for justice, but they're having the wrong voices to tell them what that looks like. And that is
Yeah.
so my heart and my mission is to say, like, true justice, true equity is equity and justice for all people. It doesn't leave anyone out. So
Yeah. That's brilliant. That is brilliant. And so do you think equity is only something that can be enacted like interpersonally between person to person? Or is it something that's maybe, do you think it's both person to person and, like, let's bring in that big word, systemically? Do you think, what are your thoughts on a broader approach to sort of systemic equity to fight systemic racism? What are your thoughts on that?
you know what? I totally feel like most things start person to person.
Hmm.
Because those systems that make up, systemic racism is full of people. you know,
Right.
it's not just like a cloud of racism hanging over a building. It's the people maybe that bring racist
Yeah.
tendencies, ideas, or viewpoints, right? And so I feel like it starts with us as individuals doing
Mm,
heart check. I feel like equity in itself is a work of the heart. Like, it's hard to be fair and think of other people and be equitable if you are self-centered, if you are selfish, if you are living in fear, thinking like, oh my gosh, if
right.
I look out for somebody else or they get the opportunity, what is my life going to be like? All those things keep us in a place of just not really um valuing our fellow man, our fellow
Yeah.
woman in the way that we should. And so I think when we do some hard work, some hard check, like, no, you know what? Like, I'm only responsible for me, and I can make sure that I'm doing the work to be fair and to be equitable, to be kind, to, whatever the case may be in your
Yeah.
situation, but doing that first, because that then will carry over into your workplace, whether that's schools or businesses or what
Right.
have you, hospitals, wherever you work, wherever you are, your community. And one of the things I love, because I really believe in this, is I hold these little smaller events, these gatherings called Equity Lens Cafes. And what I do is I ask people to host them at their homes or their businesses or churches or whatever. And I just show up and I talk about equity, and they can have, like, just like drinks and snacks and things like that. And I say, invite 10 of your closest friends or people from your community or your job, and we can just come together and talk about it. And those are so powerful because it gives people a space to actually talk about these hard things, hear other people, and then decide to make changes. So then if I'm in a part of a conversation like that, now I'm having dinner with a few friends next week, that might come up like, hey, you know what? I went to this like kind of equity discussion, and these are some things that we talked about. Now you are like, now it's having a ripple effect because now you're thinking through, like, how am I being equitable to the server who's coming, and and fair to the person who's coming to wait on me at my table, or the other people in
Yes.
my community or my family or my friendships or and my job. And it's just like a ripple effect. And I think that then is what brings about the change, because if 5 people in a group of 10 working at a business are like, no, we understand equity is for all, we understand that all people are valuable and should be treated fairly, then we're going to push back on anything in this company that is racist or not right, or what have you. And so those 5 people, because they've had the work done on their heart and they've been influenced and positively changed and have a different perspective and more insight, they can then help shift the culture there. And then we can start kind of tearing down walls that have been built up over time, and we can see some change. But it all starts with us individuals.
Yes. Period. Thank you for that. Okay,
Yeah.
so what I'm gathering is that because we can now, as in this point of the discussion, we can separate equity from race. Equity is just not, it's treating people fairly because we are all equal. Is
Mhm.
it possible for marginalized individuals to be inequitable? And going a step further, what is your stance on Christians? Because we're both believers.
Mhm.
And what is your stance on Christians taking the identity, especially as Black Christians like you and I,
Mhm.
taking that identity of the mainstream narrative of us being, we're marginalized, we're oppressed. Therefore, it's okay for us um, to be inequitable
Mhm.
under the guise of equity.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on where this stands, like, as a Christian? Like, is that something that's okay? Is that something that you think is actually, it breaks the Lord's heart? Like, how do you reconcile Black Christians, mainstream equity, sin, and where that all collides?
Yeah. One of my friends, he's Hispanic, and he said to me, Maisha, I was having a conversation with some people, people of color, and he said, and they all just told me that the only people who can be racist are white people. And he said, I just kept looking at them and saying, what are you talking about? Anybody can choose to be to be any way or anything, right? And so he said, so help me understand that. And I said, unfortunately, there has been, because of those voices, the loud voices that are trying to push certain narratives, those who say like only marginalized people can be racist or inequitable or treat people unfairly. And that's just not true. That's just
Mm,
not true. All of us have the capability, the ability to be mean, to be unfair, to be hurtful, to be selfish. Like all of those awful things can be a
mhm.
part of all of us. And so I think it's very unfortunate. As a believer, I feel like I look to Jesus as the greatest example of equity. He said he came for everyone. He came for all. He would want
Amen.
all people to know him. And so if he came for all people, that means that his heart in every situation is for all people. And that's
Amen.
what I want to model in my life, is looking out for all people. I remember just recently I was in the grocery store at the store, and I was helping this lady with something. She was like, "Why are you so nice?" I'm like, "You're like
Ooh.
sister." You know what I mean? You're just like another person that's so
Yeah.
valuable and important in God's eyes. Like, why wouldn't you be important in mine? And
Mm.
so we could just live that out every day, like live the model of, Christianity. Like Christianity is so countercultural to the world's way, even of thinking about equity. It says that we
Right.
should do good to those who like despise us or curse us or say all manner of evil against us. Like the world is gonna be like, oh, you write them off, or those are red flags and all of those things. But the Bible is actually so different because it is a reflection of Jesus and how he wants
Mm.
to live, and he gives us the ability through him to live that out. And it can be challenging and hard, but he is the greatest example. And we know that how he loved people, how he said love is not easily offended. Love
Yeah.
keeps record of wrong. So like to be like, well, back in the day, or this person or that person, or years and years ago, like unfortunately we gotta let that go. And even in our hearts we're like, but this is wrong. But we can let it go, and we can move forward, and move forward in a place to receive healing of our hearts on wounds that have happened because of being treated unfairly. Because I believe that every single person that's walking planet Earth has at least had one time where they've been treated unfairly, whether it was like
Mm.
the friend that sat next to you in your desk in school, or if it was, at work, or even within your own family. Like people have experienced that one time.
Yeah.
Some people many, many, many times. But I think what I'm saying is that we can all relate to how sucky it feels to not be
Yeah.
treated fairly. And from that, we can say, well, I don't want other people to feel like that. But I think our hearts have become so cold in so many ways because, of just things that constantly are happening, the narrative that's constantly pushed, the words that are being constantly spoken to make you believe
Mm.
that everybody's out to get you and everybody hates and there's no good in the world. But yes, there is. And we can be
Yeah.
that light and that example and that truth to other people, to say, you know what, like it doesn't have to be like that. Like we have another
Yeah.
way. So
So
yeah.
how would you advise people who say, like, I was struggling with treating people fairly because
Mhm.
I have had so much of that unfairness thrown my way. How and I am being told, whether that's in the college classroom or in work, DEI, sessions, that the only way that's going to change is if I counteract that with the same sort of treatment, the same sort of, closing doors for some people of certain skin colors, and opening doors, holding space for other marginalized people. How do I how do I transition from that place of I have been treated so unfairly to, you know what? I'm going to listen to Maisha, and I'm going to actually begin to treat everyone around me more equitably. What would your advice be?
Yeah, and you know what? There are many of people who I believe feel like that, and I think it's a mindset shift of your own, like your own mindset to be like, okay, I could really be a bitter person. Like I really could
Mm,
be upset, but I'm going to make the choice not to. Because in
yeah.
that, there's like so much freedom and not letting certain things control you. And so it's
Ooh,
actually a way of
yeah.
control. You're letting all the bad things control your behaviors, control how you see people, control your opinions, control what you think. Like you're being controlled and you're not being controlled by something good. So if you're not being controlled by something good and you're being controlled by all these things that have happened to you, which were bad things, then it's gonna spill forward in your actions toward other people. And it's actually at the end of the day, not making you a happier person. It's not making you, feel joyful or like you're really living your life to the fullest. I don't believe. So what I would have to say is like first, like a mindset shift, deciding, making that choice within yourself that I'm not allowing these things to control me because I want to
Mm,
live in like complete freedom in my mind, complete freedom in my thoughts, in my heart, and my actions toward people. I want to be free to love without reservation, free to just be kind, free to extend
yeah.
a helping hand, whatever. I think another thing is that you have to be like willing to let it go and not generalize and say
Ooh,
this
yeah.
people have done these things to me because if you look back over times and all the people who've hurt you, you probably can look at the fact that they were probably all different skin colors, all
Right.
backgrounds, all different educational,
That
status
part.
or what have you. So then why do we attribute it to like the one thing when it's like, oh, well, that with that person right there, they actually could have just been jealous of me because I got an opportunity. Maybe that's why they treated me bad. This person over here, maybe it was that they're afraid of, fear of something else. So that's why they treated me bad. You know what I mean? Like it could be
Mhm.
other things. That have been the cause of that, and then I kind of identifying that, but then saying, "But you know what? I'm gonna let that go." And
Yeah.
just recently, I was speaking in Wisconsin, and, I was in this workshop, and I was talking about equity, and I remember seeing a gentleman at the back, and he kinda had his head down, he was, like, kinda shaking his head like he did not wanna hear me, and I'm only, like,
Mm,
2 minutes in, and I'm like, "Oh, man," and I always acknowledge the fact that when I'm talking about equity, I am not trying to excuse anyone's poor behavior. There are people who just
right.
operate ignorantly. There are people who don't do the right things. Like that's going to be forever, right? And so I
Right.
never want people to think like I'm trying to brush over like the pain of things that have happened in their past. But what I'm saying is it doesn't have to control you. And so I'm watching this
Amen.
gentleman at the back and I'm just like, wow, God, I'm like, I just feel like he's having a hard time receiving it. Now I'm like 5 minutes in and I'm just still talking. I'm still going for it. And I just felt like I needed to transition and talk about the power of forgiveness. And so I
Mm,
did. And it was gonna be like it was at the end of my notes. So like the very last page.
mm.
But I felt in that moment I needed to talk about that to kind of open up his heart to receive the rest of my message because I felt like he wasn't hearing anything because he's
Yeah,
probably
yeah, yeah.
replaying like some of the unfair treatment that he's experienced. And so I'm just talking about the power of forgiveness, the power of kind of letting go, making the choice to move forward, not saying that those things were right. That's not what forgiveness is. It's not like, oh, okay, that was okay that you did this. No, it's not. It's like it
Yeah.
wasn't okay, but I'm making a choice to let that go, that pain go from, and that mistreatment, kind of let it go from my own heart and my own, being. And so what was cool was when I got to that part and then I kind of saw a little bit of him change a little bit. By the end
Mm,
of that 1 hour talk, I literally saw this guy sitting up, sitting forward, like smiling at me. And I was like,
yeah.
wow, like I just
Wow.
watched a transformation right before my eyes because I was
Mhm.
from a balanced perspective. I was speaking truth. I was speaking about all people. And it was so refreshing, even the people in the room. And I just kept saying, like, this is about all of us. This is about everybody. People like cheering, like, yes, yes, yes. And there are people of all different backgrounds. Many of them had just gotten out of prison, like over, the last few years and were reestablishing their life in the community. So I can
Wow.
imagine
Yeah.
the things that they've experienced. And so it was just really cool because I was like, it's about all of us. It's about all of us
Mm,
another fairly, looking out for another. We can let go of some of these things. And that's the only way we're going to drive out a lot of these constant issues that we've had in our society around unfair treatment. And when I'm out in public and I see something unfairly, I respectfully just bring it to the person. Sometimes I give an example, I might ask a question, I give a scenario,
Yes.
whatever, just to help them understand like how that was unfair, because oftentimes people are ignorant to it, and and I say
Yeah.
ignorant very like not meanly, but just unaware, like, oh. And I would find that sometime when I do workshops, or I'm talking to teachers, or I'm having little discussions and people share stories with me, and I say, how about this approach, what about this, did you ever think about that?
Mhm.
Oh yeah, I didn't. Now I can see how that wasn't fair for all people,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
decide to make some changes. So
That's awesome. And I actually have a super chat from Burnt Toast Space Girlfriend. Thank you so much for the super chat. Super chat is asking, I'm blind and would like to help other people with disabilities integrate into their communities and vocations. How can I use elements of equity to help all people? Thank you for the conversation.
yeah, wow, thank you so much. That is a really great question, because I believe there's a place for all of us in society to have influence and make an impact. And so I think that as a blind person, you probably know many of the struggles of being blind, and how those things can be really unfair to people of the blind community. So I think thinking through that, and then offering suggestions on ways that, whether it's, community organizations or churches or schools or whatever, you could pick like a certain area that you can give some suggestions on how to improve that space for the blind community. Like, for example, I was sharing with the company, how if they have even one person in their office in a wheelchair, then to be fair, to be equitable, would be to make sure that the things that that person needs are within his reach. And so we don't have to have cabinets up high and things that he can't get to do his job. And so what then could that look like, and what changes could be made within the organization to make sure that there is nothing standing in the way for this person to be successful, and what would be done that's fair. Some people might say, oh, well, this is just the way it is. Well, that's not equity. Is like, is this right? Is this the right thing to do? Is this fair? And to me, in that situation, what would be right and fair would say, let's make sure these resources that he needs, because he is capable of doing his job, this is something that can hold him back. And then what do we need to do to fix that and to solve that problem? I think is very something that can also impact, and very helpful to the blind community as well.
Mm, thank you for answering that. And Carl G is sending in another super chat. Thank you so much, Carl G. Really appreciate that. Carl is asking, equity is the legs of equality. Great, but people don't use that definition. So, unless we can effectively promote the new definition, how does it help?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that what's out right now is more of
Yeah,
the new definition. Like, what I'm saying is not a new definition. When you talk about equity, is the quality of
I
being fair.
see what you're saying. Yeah.
But and I just use it to help people understand the difference between equity and equality, saying like equity is like
Mm,
next to that, but it's just the quality of being fair. I think that
mm-hmm.
kind of gone a whole different direction with it, and it's very unfortunate. So I think what we can do, and when we're having conversation or talking about it, we can say, hey, wait, I thought equity was like the quality of being fair, just being fair to people and doing what's fair. And then
Right.
we can talk about like what's fair. I have two children. So when I'm talking, if they think something's not fair, I'm like, okay, well, tell me why you think that's not fair. And then here's my perspective of why I think it is. And we can kind of come to a common place. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just unfortunate that what has become of this word equity, the word equity did not just show up on the scene
Yeah.
just in the last few years. It's always, it's been around, but I think people have decided that they're going to make it what they want. And I think about that even like with the word love, right? It's like, well, some people promote, when I say love, I think about love as like the biblical standard of love, like what God says on how you love people. And that's how I
Mm-hmm.
define it. Now, if someone else and there are many people who come along and I see on cups like love is love and other things like that, well, then that's a different way that people are seeing it or explaining it or saying it, but it doesn't take away from what I stand for, when I
I
believe on
see.
love. That's what I'm going to continually promote. I'm
Right.
going to promote that love is kind and not easily angered and keeps no record of wrongs and all, those
Mm,
kind of things. So I think we can do that with equity. We can just kind of keep going back to like, I don't see how it's all of those things. Like I just feel like it's
mhm.
being fair. And if somebody can really present a valid argument for something being fair that doesn't include all people,
Yeah,
maybe you can hear them out, but I just don't even know how that would be the case.
got you. And I'm also wondering, hopping off of Carl's question, right?
Mhm,
Would you think it's maybe more beneficial because now this new definition, according to you, the mainstream definition
mhm,
is the new definition.
mhm,
The definition that you're using for equity is what has kind of existed for at least thousands of years
mhm,
because you're drawing your inspiration for the definition of equity from the Bible,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So my question is, would it be helpful because mainstream media has really spread this like divisive equity definition, like the definition of equity in the divisive sense, right?
Mhm,
Present discrimination for past discrimination,
mhm.
categorizing people according to power and black people being powerless. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is, do you think it would be helpful to have a new definition for your version of equity because this one's been so trampled on and co-opted?
Yeah. Yes, and I've been trying to, and that's why I love having these conversations because I think just constantly putting it out there and like reminding people, like, hey, wait, there was a definition of equity, true equity that it is, considering all people before this more mainstream definition came along. I think we often tend to go with what's louder, what's loudest out there, and like, oh, that's it. And so I think when I say equity, sometimes it puts such a bad taste in people's mouth. You would not
Right.
believe people that DM me on Instagram or message me on something and say, just use the word equality, don't use equity, because I think they've been
Right.
hurt by it. And so to me, I'm like,
Mm.
do we really want to follow the mainstream definition of equity when it's really caused so much division? Like
Oof.
that doesn't even feel good, for most people. And so
Yeah.
I think that we, as people who are like, no more of that, we just have to push back. And I think it's unfortunate because, you push back, you get called all kind of names and
Yeah.
looked down on and all those awful, horrible things, being canceled or whatever. But
Yeah.
it's okay because it's just when you do stand for what's right, you're going to be oftentimes, criticized and what have you. But it's okay because in the long run, if you know what you're doing is right and what you're saying is right, then it's okay. And I will stand by the fact that when I'm talking about equity, when I'm doing any workshop, I'm considering all people. You will
Yeah.
never find me talking, just saying, well, I'm only believing equity
Mm.
pertains to a certain group of people.
Yeah.
Not on my watch, never, because I am just so blessed to have had the opportunity and experiences with people who don't look like me, people who are, based on age or gender or race, socioeconomic status, all those things around me that are so different that I see as so valuable. And so that has really framed the way I see equity as well, because
Yeah.
of just the appreciation and the love and the value that I have for the human race.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for breaking that down. You know what I realized as you're saying that
Yeah.
is I actually have a lot of hurt from this like mainstream definition of equity. And I realized like we did just briefly talk about what do we do when someone's been treated unfairly, right? And they need to start treating people fairly. And I realize that a lot of this DEI conversation, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this as well, if you are drawn to this conversation, there might be a hurt because I made a whole video about why I can't stand equity, right?
Mhm.
There might be a hurt from some DEI session where you were made to write like a letter of apology when you're like, I don't know what I'm apologizing for. Or you might be hurt because like, the notion of treating people unfairly in the name of fairness just seemed violating to your moral standard. Do you think some of us who have that bitterness against the people who've been promoting this, according to your new definition of equity, do you think we need to do a bit of like forgiveness there, a bit of letting go of that pain of of this like this divisive version of equity?
Ye Absolutely, because that
Yeah.
can I think most times when people push back on the word, it's because they've had inexperience where
Yeah.
something has happened that has been painful to them in the name of equity. And,
Mm.
so I do think sometimes hard work has to be done for you to see, and I'm all about reflecting and, like, unpacking and processing, like, "Wait a second, like, why did I do that action? Okay, so
Mm.
why did I do that?" Like, taking off the layers and seeing, like,
Yeah.
what really is behind the feelings or the way I responded or the way I'm thinking about this. Because I think for me that just helps me to kind of get down to the nitty gritty and do the work then that I need to do. And
Mm.
so I would definitely say that. And I have lots of conversations with people who are constantly like, I don't get it. Like, I don't get why I have to sit in a discussion on equity and they focus mostly on race and I'm the only person who's not of color. So then they feel like
Yeah.
all the attention's on them. They're
Is on them.
yeah, sitting in the room, like, being blamed, and they're like, "But I've never done any of those things, but because of my
Yeah.
skin color only, like, I'm told I'm this way or that way, and I think a certain way, or I have this perspective," and people have been hurt, and I know it, and so my heart goes out to people on any end, on any side of it, who
Yeah.
has been, unfairly treated in the name of equity, and I always like to give people when people think want like scenarios or examples of like things that are inequitable. I like to kind of give some ideas of what things are out there, so I'm going to share this one example.
Yeah.
I was going to apply to be a part of a chamber of commerce, and I looked it up and I was like, okay, what are the fees? I was kind of looking for a larger one in my community. And so I went a couple towns over and I was like, okay, let me see how much the fee is. And the fee was like $400 to join the Chamber of Commerce. But if you're a person of color, the first year is $100. And I got
Mm.
so deeply offended by that for a few
Yeah.
reasons. And not offended where like I'm super like angry at a person. I think it was the idea that was
Right.
presented. That's what I was offended at. And I got offended because I thought, so what are you saying here? Because I'm a person of color, I need a handout? Or is this like somebody's way to try to make things right for what they might consider like inequities or injustices toward people of color? Um, or three, what about my friend who's a single mom who's starting her own business and she's white, but she can't get the $100 deal and she really needs
Yeah.
a $100 deal because she needs her business to grow so she can take care of her two children. But because she's
Mhm.
not a person of color, she has to pay the $400 to join the Chamber of Commerce. But I only have to pay 100, even though I am better off financially than this friend might be, right? So I'm trying to process all these things. So in the name of equity, probably that came about like, oh, let's offer this to people of color. But I'm like, well, we're seeing it one side as like, oh, I get a handout or I get a benefit. But it's like, well, why are some people left out then? Maybe decide a questionnaire. We give 2,100 Chamber of Commerce memberships out a year. Fill out this questionnaire. Maybe you don't put anything about gender or race or socioeconomic status. Maybe it's just two questions, three questions, and you're asking like, why is the need? What is your business? Like, where are you in starting off or whatever, something that can kind of level the playing field for everybody. And that when you're offering that $100 membership, you're allowing people who need it to pay the $100. So that's like an example of like, why was that probably something that was done to be fair
Yeah.
and equitable, but it left some people out.
People exactly.
And that's not cool. And I think there are ways for everybody to be looked out for. Do we have a long way to go with that? Absolutely. So I'm not saying it's like,
Yeah.
woo, tomorrow we're gonna be there, we're gonna breathe, and everybody's gonna be treated fairly. Like I know that it takes work, but it takes work on all of our part, and it takes us pushing back on things that we're like, that's not right, that's not fair. And I often think that it takes people who are outside of that group. Like for me, as a woman of
Yeah.
color, I gotta push back on that because people would
Mhm.
might not expect me to push back on that because they see it as, oh, I'm helping you by only making you pay $100. And in other
Right.
situations, maybe a man needs to push back on something because he sees the injustice or and equity toward women in that particular area. Maybe in
I
somebody
see.
something else, it's like a person who's very well educated or has a doctorate may need to push back and say, well, why are you putting these stipulations on this position when you really don't need to have this level of education and you're keeping some people out. So we all need to see what part of the how we can be part of the solution to the inequities that are taking place.
That's excellent, Maisha. Thank you so much for sharing all of that insight. Um, I'm really grateful for everyone who joined in on the conversation. I've been reading along and I appreciate everything everyone has shared. For those who sent super chats, thank you so much. Um, Myesha,
Yeah.
do you have any resources for anyone who feels like they want to learn more about equity, perhaps learn more about either the mainstream definition of equity, the origins of that,
Mhm.
why that is wrong, or maybe learn about the biblical definition of equity from which you operate? What would you recommend? Any resources out there that people can be directed to?
Yeah, you know what? I have a website, and on there I write blogs. So there's some blogs on my website that you might want to check out. You can also join as you can subscribe to my website, and can send out, excuse me, information. I have an upcoming blog that'll be posted, titled "What Does God Say About Equity?" It's all about biblical equity. I am will have a book that will be out soon, and it's for educators, and it's Equity Within My Four Walls. It's really talking about
Nice.
like how you as a teacher can operate equitably. It's a great gift if you have kids who have a teacher. So that'll be out soon. I'm on Instagram.
It's
You can follow me there. Yeah.
the book title. I'm typing it for the people in the comments just so
Yes.
they can keep an eye out. Equity within our
Equity.
four walls.
Yep, Equity Within My Four Walls.
Okay.
It was posted, and then we made some changes to it. So if you go
Okay.
on Instagram, it's there, but there will be a new post actually up this afternoon where you can pre-order that if you would like that book as well. It's also a great gift for if you have kids in schools or know of educators. And it's very practical, useful. So
Yeah.
that's what I say. And then yeah, stay tuned. I actually just started up a YouTube channel, so I'm going to be putting
Eh,
videos. Yeah, it's called The Truth About Equity. So you
okay.
can
So
already find it and go subscribe, but it's called The Truth About Equity. And
okay.
I'll be posting my first video on there this weekend. So I'm super
I
excited.
love that.
Hey, yes, yes. So I'm excited. And then I do, if you want to reach out to me on my website, I do workshops. I just held an equity symposium, and that was a kind of an all day amazing, amazing experience.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I do workshops for schools and businesses, nonprofits, anybody who wants to talk about equity in a very balanced way that doesn't leave anyone out and really does help to bring about some true change.
Love that. Thank you so much. Appreciate all those resources. Check out Maisha's website. I dropped it in the description below. Thank you so much, Maisha. Thank you for joining me today. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate you and thank you for contributing to the conversation. I will catch you next time. Love you all and have a great, great week. Bye-bye.